The member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Energy, representing the Minister for Education and Training. Will the Minister inform the House how the government's needs-based funding model will provide the greatest funding increases to the most disadvantaged students in schools like St Mary's School, Colac, in my electorate of Corangamite? Will the Minister outline to the House how the
member
government's—
for Corangamite will resume her seat. The member for Rankin is warned, as is the member for Franklin. The member for Corangamite will begin her question again, and I'll deal with any interjectors. The member for Ballarat joins the warned list as well.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Energy, representing the Minister for Education and Training. Will the Minister inform the House how the government's needs-based funding model will provide the greatest funding increases to the most disadvantaged students in schools like St Mary's School, Colac, in my electorate of Corangamite? Will the Minister outline to the House how the government's quality schools reforms have been received by the community?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy, representing the Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Corangamite for her question and know that she welcomes the Turnbull government's $18.6 billion increase to school funding over the next decade, a 75% increase, Mr Speaker, to true needs-based funding in a transparent way to create a nationally consistent system. No wonder it has been warmly received by the Grattan Institute, by the Primary Schools Association, by the Christian Schools Association, by the Government Schools Association, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, about Corangamite, it has 66 schools. It has 53 government schools, 9 Catholic schools and 4 independent schools. And the interjection says, well, they're worse off. Well, in fact, news for the opposition, every one of those 66 schools are better off in Corangamite thanks to the Turnbull government's reforms, Mr Speaker. Like St Mary's of Colac, with 245 students, which will get nearly an additional $6 million over the next 10 years, Mr Speaker. $6 million, Mr Speaker. And indeed, the Catholic sector receives more Commonwealth funding per student than any other sector in every state and every territory, and I think that's important to understand. And we are coupling these reforms with additional funding with also a focus on excellence. Literacy and numeracy testing for grade 1s to encourage early intervention. Literacy and numeracy for teacher students, Mr Speaker, to assist with them. A national certification process for new principals, Mr Speaker. Now, I'm asked, are there any obstacles to this? Now, the obstacle comes from those opposite who have a support for 27 secret deals. 27 secret deals. They're supporting less money for the schools, and they're turning their back on David Gonski, who they described as the doyen, as the architect, as the oracle of a needs-based funding model. They're turning their back. Now, the member for Chifley says I like to finish with a quote, so I will today. And I will. Now, I know the member for Sydney thinks that the person who gave this quote doesn't have a vote, but he does have a voice. And guess who it's from? It's from Craig Emerson, the former Labor Minister for Tertiary Education. Now, he says, now here is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to lock in a school funding system that can give every disadvantaged child a chance of a good education, and Labor has pledged to block it. It's heartbreaking, says Craig Emerson. I say to the Leader of Opposition, don't break the heart of 9,000+